Hello and welcome to Like Maria. Today I'm going to be talking about 5 things I think you should know about the Archers. Now this is particularly for any media students studying the Archers, but might also be of interest to anyone who's a fan of the show or for anyone who's ever wondered what the fuss is all about. To give you an idea of what I'm going to be covering, I'm going to start off with a general overview and introduction to the Archers, some background info. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the theme tune, moving on to the characters, and then link to that the idea of gossip and how important gossip is to soap operas. Finally, I'm going to be looking at big storylines and the Archers in the headlines. And last but not least is the Archers fandom. So to start off with, let's give you some information about the show. The Archers is the world's longest running radio soap opera. It's also the 5th most popular radio programme in the UK and regularly attracts 5 million listeners. It first aired in the 1950s and originally aimed to deliver educational information about farming to people that were listening. And because of that, it tended to feature men who were going out farming, and women tend to play these sort of supportive roles, cooking the dinner and so on. And it wasn't until 1975 that we had any female script writers on the show. And once those female script writers arrived, we started to see more rounded female characters. But we might argue that the female characters are still very stereotypical even today. And recently there was a book published that suggested that The Archers is more sexist than a James Bond movie. The Archers airs on BBC Radio 4, which is predominantly a spoken word channel. It has 6 episodes per week that last about 13 minutes each. It goes out just after 7 o'clock in the evening and then is repeated the next day around 2 o'clock. There's also a Sunday omnibus, and some fans will tune into the original time as well as the omnibus. Now, just like any other soap opera, the theme tune of The Archers is really important in signalling to listeners that we are about to go into this other world. The theme tune itself tells us a little bit about that world. So for example, it's quite fast-paced in tempo. The instruments, the style of the music suggests a sort of British countryside, villages. It sounds quite traditional in its style, and it might tell us that the programme is quite conservative, maybe in politics, but more likely in the sort of general views of the characters. The rhythmic pattern of the theme tune, the dumpty 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 dum, is quite a classical kind of musical piece that you might notice as being quite similar to other classic pieces. Think The Apprentice theme tune, for example. But of course it's much more upbeat, quite happy sounding. In fact, there was some biometric testing done by another Radio 4 programme which found that the Archers theme tune made listeners feel happy. So this piece of music is so well known that it has become part of popular culture, and in particular it was used in the 2012 Olympics opening ceremony. It's also been suggested by Billy Connolly, the comedian, that it should become the national anthem because it is just so English. An article in the Independent in 2011 said that the Archers theme tune had been played 76,800 times. Now obviously that's quite a few years ago, so I'll let you do the maths in terms of how many times it's been played now. The theme tune really does provide continuity for soap operas. It becomes extremely familiar, and of course radio listening, we would argue, is part of routine, and so it might signal to listeners, this is what you should be doing at this time whilst you're listening to the drama unfold. But it's not just the theme tune that helps create the world of the Archers. It tends to feature specific places like Ambridge itself, Borsetshire. It has specific products, so the beer is called Shires. We have the Borsetshire blue cheese, and we have Tumble Tussock cider made by the Grundys. There's also regular village events like the Fete, the Pantomime, the Flower and Produce Show. All of these things help to create this world that we are expected to believe in. Theme tunes of soap operas do tend to stay the same. They might be tweaked slightly over the years. What we find with the Archers is there is a slightly different version on the Sunday omnibus, and also the Archers Extra, which was a younger kind of spin-off show that was on Radio 4 Extra, also had a slightly different sound to it too, and was performed by the folk band Bellowhead. So to sum up, theme tunes tend to stay the same. They tend to give us information about the world we're entering in. They tell us what sort of class the characters are, what sort of location they live in, what sort of storylines we might expect, all from the kind of tone and pace of the theme. So now I'm going to move on to the characters, and I'm going to show you a few pictures of the actors that play particular characters, which I don't know whether or not that's helpful. Certainly I think with a radio drama you are encouraged to imagine what the characters look like, and the actors' faces aren't really that important. What is really important though is the characters' accents. Being set in rural England, you would expect all the characters to have quite broad rural accents, but actually the accents in the Archers help to tell us what sort of class the different characters are. So for example, Jennifer and Brian both use clear pronunciation and generally sort of RP accents, as does Linda and Robert Snell, and also Jim. And all of these characters we would argue are higher class or posh, whereas some of the other characters sound more friendly because of their regional accents. So we have Ruth, who's from Newcastle, we have Jazza, who's Scottish, we have Ian, who's from Ireland. Radio relies heavily on voice, of course. It's a really good way to distinguish between the characters, and so distinct voices are really important. Those with stronger accents, particularly regional accents, tend to be of the lower classes. So if you think about someone like Susan, who is desperately trying to social climb, her accent is really strong, and her voice, the tones that she uses, is really quite squawky and unpleasant. There have been some criticisms of the Archers saying that the accents used by characters are not sort of regionally specific. They haven't got those details that you would look for if you were doing a linguistic study, and instead that they are sort of generically rural accents. Probably the family that's got the strongest rural accent is the Grundys. It's not just characters' voices that are important, it's also the silent characters that add to the world of the Archers. And some of them have got great names, like Terry Two Phones, for example. These silent characters are important because they give a sense that the programme is continuing outside the episodes we hear, so that life goes on even when we're not eavesdropping on conversation. Now, we might assume that some of these silent characters are unimportant, but just because they start as silent characters doesn't mean that they will remain as silent characters throughout the soap opera's lifespan. Research also suggests that there is a huge number of silent characters within the Archers, an average of 2 per episode. Many of the silent characters are quite two-dimensional, and their storylines kind of revolve around the characters that do speak, so they're there to sort of flesh out plots and flesh out characters. However, some characters like Frida Fry have actually got quite developed storylines. She was there for a long time before she died in the flood, and her death has had a huge impact on other members of the village. Silent characters also have quite a long literary tradition. So, for example, think of Rosaline in Romeo and Juliet. She's spoken about, but she never speaks. As with most soap operas, the characters in the Archers are of different ages. So we've got different storylines involving the different age groups. And it's based around family life. So we have the Archer family, and there are different branches of that, and then other families that surround them. Lots of the characters are long running, so they're more developed. They become less stereotypical over time. Some of them have been in there for many, many years, and audiences enjoy kind of knowing these backstories of characters and predicting how they will behave. Now, I did say I'd say something about gossip, and of course listeners rely on gossip to keep up to date with what's going on in the village. It's often quite interesting and informative, quite juicy at times, and it's a way to talk about some of those silent characters. Susan Carter is our sort of chief gossip, and she often manipulates the gossip, the information that she has, in order to seem more important. As I said, she wants to social climb. Her roles in the soap make it easy for her to gossip. So she works in the shop, she works in the dairy alongside Clary. So she's in these situations where she can gossip with others. Along with Clary, Susan has been compared to something like a Greek chorus, commenting on the goings on in the village. And of course the gossip is a representation that can be found pretty much in all soaps and is fairly essential. So you may think that The Archers is a sleepy soap opera, especially as it's described as an everyday story of country folk, but it does get its fair share of headlines. And probably the first example of this is in 1955, when a well-loved character, Grace Archer, died in a stable fire. Now, this news was so shocking that it made the front page news the very next day. Now, over the years, there's been different theories as to why Grace was killed off on this particular date. Many believe it's because it was the first night of broadcast for the new channel ITV, and this was an attempt by the BBC to sabotage that. More recently, though, the actress who played Grace Archer has spoken out about how she was labelled as a troublemaker by the bosses because she asked for the same pay as her male counterparts. Whichever of these stories is true, they give us an insight into the relationship between institution and production. More recently, other big storylines have made the news, and in particular in 2016, a storyline of domestic abuse and coercive control aired and featured Helen Archer and her husband Rob Titchener. Now, at the time, it made for hard listening. It was quite shocking, and the storyline developed over a long time. Many listeners were upset, frustrated by what they were hearing, and this led to an online campaign to raise money for refuge. It raised nearly £170,000 and reflects how, although audiences knew that Helen was a fictional character, they also knew that hundreds of women were suffering from domestic abuse all around the country and wanted to do something about it. Now, this was such a significant storyline that even now we still get references to it in newspaper stories. There's been lots of stories about the awareness of coercive control and gaslighting and so on, and a lot of that awareness comes down to the Archers. Now, even though these storylines have attracted newspaper headlines and have been very popular, there has been some backlash against these sort of racier storylines, with some people sort of suggesting that The Archers has become much more like EastEnders. But the programme has continued to discuss important issues. So we've had storylines about sepsis in 2018, which led to the sudden death of a character. And currently we have a storyline about modern day slavery taking place in the countryside. It'd be interesting to see how that pans out. Now, The Archers has always tried to reflect things that are happening in real life. There have been last-minute rewrites when there are big national events going on, rugby, Brexit and so on. But one noticeable absence has been to do with coronavirus storylines, which as yet has not featured in the programme at all. And finally, we're on to my favourite topic, which is fandom. Now, we might think that radio listening is a fairly passive activity on as part of the background noise, but actually the Archers fandom is a large fandom and very active. It engages in online activities, which helps to increase pleasure and build relationships. Now, Archers fans can be found online on Facebook with pages such as Archers Appreciation, Archers Anonymous and Archers Addicts. These are places where fans are sort of highly critical. They voice their opinions about storylines, and in particular they are critical of characters that they love to hate. So Susan, Shula, Emma, all of the characters get hate at some point, and they all get various nicknames. However, these kind of love to hate comments are kind of done in an affectionate way, and obviously other people either share those views or discuss those views and so on. Also on Facebook, you'll find Archers Academics, who are also on Twitter as well, got their own website. This is a group of fans who are also in education and present papers about the Archers. In fact, anyone can present a paper as long as their kind of research is grounded in the programme and sort of textual analysis. There is a conference every year. Fans go along, meet up in real life and talk about different topics, whether it be to do with accents, whether it be to do with sexism, whether it be to do with age. Lots of kind of very interesting topics there, and you can find some of them on YouTube. Perhaps the strongest presence for Archers fans is on Twitter, where we find lots of various accounts, fans tweeting about the show, joining in the Sunday morning omnibus tweet along. We also find kind of funny, comical parody accounts. So Master Jack Archer has got his own account, Rob Titchener's got his own account, Sergeant Harrison Burns has got his own account. We have CSI Ambridge, we have Alternative Archers, and one of my favourites used to be Ambridge Synthetics. You'll also find other fan content online, including Dumpty Dum, a really well-known podcast. We also have Mustardland, a forum where people can just discuss storylines and so on. There are other Archers fan sites, and the important thing to note is just that all of these are in addition to the BBC's official web pages and Twitter accounts and so on. So it's not just about the BBC pushing this product towards the audience, actually the audience have taken control. Now this is where we can say a little bit about Henry Jenkins and his theory of participatory culture. He says audiences use technologies to form online communities, and we can definitely see that here. The audience are empowered by discussing the storylines and the characters and so on. He also says that viewers and creators have forged a closer relationship. We can see that with Twitter and scriptwriters such as Kerry Davis answering questions about the scripts. He talks about characters. He's someone who's written companion books. He is a scriptwriter. And he also, in this tweet here, recognises the diversity and the power of the audience and how the audience are active participants interpreting the world of the Archers. The Archers also has a number of celebrity fans and has also had a number of celebrity appearances. For example, Annika Rice and Kirsty Allsopp have both been to various village events. The Pet Shop Boys played at Lock's Fest. More recently, Alison Steadman, probably best known for playing Pam in Gavin and Stacey, appeared in the show as one of Pat's old friends. These appearances really show how much the Archers is embedded in British culture. Well, I hope you found that video useful. Well done if you're still listening. It was a bit of a mammoth video today, but thanks for joining me and see you again soon. Bye!